Today in our 2017 Ram 2500, we're going to be taking a look at and installing the CURT Custom Fifth Wheel Installation Kit with a carbide finish, part number C16427-204. Now it's also available in gloss black using part number C16427-104. So here's what our rails look like fully installed. They're going to be sitting in our bed and they're only going to take up right about just a little bit over an inch of room in our bed. Now these rails are going to allow us to put a fifth wheel in our bed and tow a fifth wheel trailer. And now these rails are going to accept most industry standard fifth wheel bases. Now these rails do come with a custom kit for our truck, which is going to reduce the installation time because we're not going to have to drill into any part of the frame. We'll just have to drill several small holes to mount our rails into the bed. Now our rails are made of steel with a nice black powder coat finish, so they're going to be rust and corrosion resistant, and they're going to complement any color of your truck. Now that we've gone over some of the features, let's show you how we get them installed. To begin our installation, I removed our spare tire. Now we're going to need to come under and we're going to remove our heat shield to give ourselves a little bit more room and so you can see better. If we come to the side of the frame here, towards the back, we're going to have two bolts. I'm going to use a 10mm socket to remove those. Now if we come to this cross member here, we're going to have two bolts holding our heat shield against it, and again I'm going to be using a 10mm socket. Now the easiest way to get to behind it is go over the rail. You can actually just reach back and feel for the bolt, that way you can get your socket on it. We're going to set this aside for safekeeping for right now. Now when we get ready to install our brackets, I want to mention we're going to have M14 bolts. And we're going to have two slightly longer ones. Now these are going to go in our forwardmost bracket in the forwardmost hole. And the reason why they're longer is because we have to put a spacer in between there. Now if we come to our driver's side, right by our shock and our rear axle, we're going to see two weld nuts. We're going to take our brackets here. Now we're going to want to make sure that the two tabs with the oval slotted holes are facing towards the center of our truck. They're going to go around our bed support just like that. We're going to line up the holes. But before we put it in place, you want to make sure that you get the correct hardware to go in the correct hole. As I mentioned before, we're going to have two M14 bolts. Now towards the rear, we're going to use the shorter one with a conical tooth washer with the teeth facing the bracket. We're going to put it in hand tight for right now. Now in the back here, you'll see there's a slight gap. We're going to take our spacer block and in between our bracket and the frame, we're going to slide that into place, lining up the holes on our bracket and our frame. Then we're going to take our longer M14 bolt and we're going to thread it into place. Now once we have everything in hand tight, we're going to take our bracket and we're going to push it as far back towards the rear of our truck that we can. Now we're going to come to our brackets and the oblong holes that are going towards our bed, we're going to take a center punch. We're going to mark the center of where we're going to drill. Now it may be a little bit hard to see to verify up top, but since we know that we don't have anything in our bed and we don't have any electrical connectors or anything to worry about, we're going to take a small drill bit and we're going to drill a pilot hole from the bottom going up top. Now we're going to repeat the same process on the other side as well. Now on our driver's side, I do want to mention we're going to have several lines, vacuum lines and electrical connectors right by our fuel tank here. Now we do need to remove these lines temporarily from the frame rail so that we can get our bracket into place. Now I'm just going to take a flathead screwdriver and pop out all the clips that are holding in my lines. Now, you just want to be extra careful not to damage any of the connectors or any of the steel lines that are on the frame. So I put my mounting rail on my bed to verify that the pilot holes that I drilled line up with the holes in my mounting plate. We're going to come to the center and we're going to mark out the most forward hole in the center. We're gonna need to drill a pilot hole, and then the holes that we already drilled, we're gonna be enlarging to a 9/16. Now we're gonna repeat that same process for all the remaining holes. Now it's always a good idea to put a little bit of protection over the bare metal. So I'm gonna take a little bit of black spray paint, cover all the holes that I just drilled. That way I don't have to worry about any rust or any corrosion affecting my bed. Now that our holes are drilled, I'm going to put our rail back into place, loosely lining up the holes. Now we can get ready to put our hardware in place. Now anywhere that there's a gap in between the rail and the bed, between the ribs here, we're going to need to take a spacer block and we're going to slide it underneath the rail just so that it goes around our mounting hole, so it has something to grab onto whenever we put our bolts and tighten everything down. We're going to take our 1/2-inch carriage bolts and drop them into all the corresponding holes that we just drilled. With our hardware loosely in place, we're going to take our 1/2-inch spacer block here. We're going to put it over our hardware. Then we're going to loosely install a 1/2-inch nut. Now we're going to repeat that process for all the remaining hardware we have left. Now that we have our forward mounting rail in place, we're actually going to take the base or the fifth wheel that you're going to be using and you're going to mount it into your rail towards the cab. Then we're going to take our second rail and we're going to put it in place where it lines up with our fifth wheel so we can figure out where we need to mark all our holes. Now once we have it in place, we're going to take a measurement and make sure it's nice and square. So we're going to measure from the wheel well here to our rail. We're going to want to make sure it's the same on both sides. Now that we have our rail square, we're going to pull towards the tailgate, make sure it's a nice tight fit. We don't have any loose play in there. And now we're going to mark our holes that we're going to start drilling. Now we're going to have several different holes on our rail here, and we're going to want to come to the innermost hole. And we're going to mark, and we're going to do that on the front and the back side. Now for our center hole, we're going to go towards the tailgate. So you're going to want to mark the center hole towards the back of the vehicle. And the other side again, we're doing the innermost holes. So you just want to make a mark, then we come back and drill our pilot holes. Now we don't have to, but I always recommend removing the rail before you start drilling, that we don't have to worry about damaging your rails or scratching them or anything. And we're going to repeat that for all the other marks that I made. Again, using a step drill bit, I'm going to drill out my pilot holes to a 9/16 hole. I'm going to repeat that process for all the remaining holes. Now I want to mention, if we come to our forwardmost hole on each side, forward towards the cab, if your pilot hole did not go all the way through the bed support underneath, you can go ahead and drill that out now. Just a small hole, make sure that it's going all the way through, and when you look down, you can see daylight and you can see the ground underneath. Now here on the driver's side, this is the pilot hole that we drilled through. Now we're going to need to come back and using a step drill bit, I'm going to enlarge that hole to a 7/8 inch. Now we're going to want to periodically check to make sure that our spacer can fit inside of our hat channel there. Now once we can, we're going to come back and put a little bit of spray paint on my bare metal so we don't have to worry about any rust. Now we're going to repeat that same process on the other side as well. Now on the passenger side here, we do have an exhaust hanger, but if we can get our spacer block in through our hat channel from the side, we only need the hole big enough so then we have our bolt drop down through. It may take a little bit of work and patience, and you may take some weird angles that you're going to drill at. Now before we put our spacer blocks in place, In the instructions, it does let us know that we may need to trim our spacer blocks. So one way to find out is if you put it into your hat channel and you have any bit sticking out, you're going to need to trim that down so that it's flush or as close as flush as possible with the hat channel sitting in there vertically. Now you can either use a grinder or a cutoff wheel or anything you have available to shave down the edge. So if I come to my passenger side here, in between my frame and my bed, I'm going to have a bed support right here. Now I'm going to take a magnet to help me get my spacer into my hat channel, get it lined up. And once I get it fairly close to where I need it, lined up with that hole, I'm going to take a flathead screwdriver. I'm going to bend it into position, making sure that I can reach all the way through. Now with our spacer blocks in place, I got a screwdriver going through so they won't go anywhere. And now I'm going to lift up my hitch and I'm going to slide my rail back into place, lining up all the holes. And once we have our rails in place and our holes lined up, here on the driver's side, the one with the spacer block, we're going to take that extra long carriage bolt and we're going to drop it into place. Now here on the passenger side, we're going to take our long hex bolt and a flat washer. And we're going to remove the screwdriver and drop it down into the slot. Now it may help if you have an extra set of hands underneath the truck with a screwdriver holding your spacer block in place. That way when you push the bolt through, you can push down on the screwdriver and it'll go into place while the screwdriver comes out. Now we're just going to put the rest of our hardware in place, and just like before, we're going to make sure that if it's laying on a low spot, we're going to put that spacer in between. Now if we come over to our driver's side where our bolts come through, I'm going to remove this fastener here holding my harness onto my frame. That way I don't have to worry about it interfering or getting in the way. I'm just going to take a flathead screwdriver, pry out on the clip, and move it out of the way. Now, this is going to be our driver's side bracket. It's going to be the larger of the two. We're going to line up the holes that are in the tabs here with the holes that are in the bracket. We're going to slide our bracket up into place. Then we can take our spacer blocks, just like before. We're going to line them up with our bolts. Then we're going to come back with our 1/2-inch flange nuts and install them. And we can repeat the same process for the other bolts as well. Now for the holes in the side of our frame, we're going to take our M14 bolts and our conical tooth washer. Again, making sure that the teeth are facing towards our bracket, and we can put those in place loosely. Now with this side done, we're going to repeat the same process on the other side. Now here on the passenger side, our bracket is smaller, and we're only going to attach it to 1 point vertically and 2 points going into the frame. Now for the bolt going through our hat channel here, we're going to put in a spacer block followed by a flange nut. And when it comes time to tighten these down, it's going to be easiest if we have an extra set of hands, hold a wrench on the nut down here, and then we tighten it from up top. So if we can reach in through here, we can slide our spacer block into place and tighten our nut up. And we're going to go ahead and snug up our hardware. Now in the instructions, it wants us to tighten the rails to our brackets first, and then come back and tighten our brackets to the frame. So we're going to start with all the bolts going vertically, and I'm just going to snug them up using a 3/4 inch socket. And we're going to repeat that process for all the remaining bolts. With our rails tight, we can come back, tighten up the bolts in our frame. Now we're going to come back and we're going to torque all of our bolts to the specified amount in the instructions. We're going to repeat that for all the remaining bolts. With everything in place, we can put our heat shield back up. Now we can go ahead and put our spare tire up, and that'll finish up our installation. And that'll finish up our look at the CURT Custom Fifth Wheel Installation Kit, part number C16427-204 on our 2017 Ram 2500.
Click the link below to shop, learn more, or visit us at eTrailer.com.